Greetings, world, internet, YouTube. Welcome to another episode of Books Are Burning. No, as you may have recognized, this is not Mark, the the Barry White dark fruity tones of Mark Will. This is Steve. I am a guest. I have been a guest on Mark's other podcast, Texting. And I suggested to Mark, having read his book Pilgrimizing, which we're going to be talking about, that it might be fun to bring that show on the road. Two Books Are Burning. Mark, welcome. Welcome back to your own podcast.
Welcome to my podcast. Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be a guest on my own podcast.
What is that? Is that like a Gemini mug? Is that a Gemini?
Yeah, this is my Gemini mug.
Are you
exactly.
a Gemini?
I am.
Oh, really? When's your birthday?
May 30th.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, because I'm one of those people too. Do you?
What's your birthday?
June the 5th.
Okay. Yeah. So you have a dual nature as well.
Oh yeah, very dual, and we will be going into all of that delicious dualism in our discussion. I'm going to just jump straight in.
Yeah.
In fact, I was thinking about how, because I've got a whole bunch of questions I want to ask you. I really love this book, and there were lots of questions I had, but there was like the question that I think potentially we're leading towards. I thought I would actually just throw that in right at the right to begin with, because I think this is often the elephant in the room question when people are talking about this topic, right? So this is me. Yeah. This is my version of trying to phrase this elephant in the room question for you. You may even have a sense of what this is, what question I'm going to ask. So this is the elephant in the room question. Have you seen that 1971 Woody Allen film Bananas?
Yes.
Yeah, where he goes and he becomes he's this dictator. Fielding Mellish goes off and he becomes a dictator. He's handed over. Suddenly he has to take care of this South American country called San Marco that's going through all sorts of troubles. So the question is if through the grace of God, Benjamin Netanyahu was to have a heart attack or be offed, in whatever way, painful or otherwise, I don't care, this evening. And for some reason, someone on his cabinet, right, has your book and says, "This is the man. Let's give Mark Will a chance." And trust me, I would vote for you. I mean, if I had to vote for Bibi or Mark, I would vote for Mark or, well, just anyone other than Bibi. So the question is simply, what would you do if you were to, at this juncture, inherit the shit show that is Israel-Palestine? Also because, in a way, you very cleverly kind of avoid almost kind of giving that answer, or giving a sense of what that answer would be for you, I think, in the book.
Interesting. Well, my first instinct is to resign, to step down, but I guess before doing that, I mean, I wouldn't allow it to go that far, because I wouldn't accept the power bestowed on me, or I wouldn't stand for election. I mean, for one thing, I couldn't, because I'm not, officially Jewish, so I don't even know if I would qualify for that position.
Because all the Jews, let's face it, all the Jews, including this one, they're all nuts. They're all nuts, and the Palestinians equally nuts. It's a Cain and Abel sibling rivalry deal that's been going for thousands of years. So they're like, let's give it to somebody who's doesn't have any of that crazy Jew DNA. Infecting them and all the Holocaust bullshit.
Let's give it to a goy.
yeah, let's give it to a goy. Let's get, we want to actually sort this out. We want like something that's going to work, not some emotional, blah, blah, sentimental patch. We want something that's going to work. That's why they're saying it's you. That's why you are fielding Mellish at this point.
Well, the first thing I would say is everyone who wears their underwear on the inside will have to start wearing it on the outside. Isn't that one of his edicts in the movie? I think I remember that.
I can't remember that one. Right.
Um,
I mean, broadly
that's
speaking,
difficult. I mean,
you
I
say
would, you would have to. It's
journal.
complicated because to sort out the Israel-Palestine issue, you'd have to sort out the USA empire issue. You'd have to overthrow the one before you could overthrow the other, and I'd certainly be down for that. But I know that if I took steps to really shake things up and make changes, I'd immediately be assassinated by Mossad and or CIA, right? Like that.
Right.
That would be the. It's like the author of Rogue State. I'm forgetting his name now, but he talks about like the changes he would make. He would immediately slash the U.S. military budget if he somehow became president of the U.S. is the scenario he's considering. He would immediately slash the U.S. military budget, close all U.S. military bases, shut down the CIA, and he would be assassinated within 3 days. He says. So if you're gonna sort it out, you're like signing your own death sentence, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but like practically speaking, what is the first step to take to sort it out? I mean, you've got to stop the current uh, genocide, right? You've got to, or if you're not comfortable with that term, then ethnic cleansing, or whatever you want to call it. But how to do it as one individual, right? Like the just as in the U.S. I mean, maybe things are different in Israel. Maybe the prime minister there is more powerful than the president in the United States. But, I believe that the deep states and that is to say the national security states in both places really run the show, regardless of who, is nominally in power as president or prime minister. It's often been pointed out in Israel that, like, it's not just we like to focus all our ire on Netanyahu, Satan Yahoo, it's all him, right? It's the Likud party, but you know it wasn't any different when the opposition leader was in power for a while. Like the same policies continue, just like in the U.S., whether it's Democrat or Republican. The war machine has its way, and the intelligence services um,
Yeah, I mean,
continue to rule.
I find it interesting that you are taking, yeah, I mean, a very considered, but also very sort of political, socio-political kind of frame around this, right? Where I suppose, particularly after reading your book, I see it as very mythological. I see this as and kind of just emotional. Ultimately, I see this as two warring brothers who have been warring forever and will continue to war forever. And so my personal emotional response is just like to take their heads and just smash them together and basically just say either you stop doing this, or I don't know, or I'll throw both of you into the eradicate all of you. I mean, I do have fantasies of someone like, I don't know, Putin or some Iranian idiot just nuking that whole place, just starting from scratch, just getting rid of everything, all the idiot Israelis, all the idiot Palestinians, all um, the religiosity that is, that they use against each other to um, implicate each other and give themselves sort of carte blanche to do just kind of anything that they want towards each other.
I see now why you didn't want to run this on your channel, but but
No, for that reason, not because I'm happy to stand behind that. I'm happy to stand because I actually believe that although we make lots of noise, I don't believe anyone actually gives a flying fuck about Israel or Palestine, because it's like, as long as they're just like, killing each other and doing awful things to each other over there, far away from us, we can say lots of kind of like intelligent things about or right about what's going on, but actually it's such a shit show that as long as they just don't bring it anywhere, into our back garden, all good. And in a way, I mean, let's,
well,
yeah, I mean,
well, I mean, just to respond to that, I don't think I think it does affect us, especially, if we happen to be American citizens. Although I've distanced myself from it as far as possible, I'm on the other side of the world, living in permanent, exile, voluntary exile. I guess you could say it's voluntary, but
mm,
like it's obvious to me that the legislative bodies of the U.S. are basically owned by the Israel lobby, APAC, and other organizations. I just purchased the Mearsheimer book about the Israel lobby. You're probably familiar with that, but like that is, as they often say, the third rail in American politics. Like, you just cannot criticize Israel or you know, refuse to stand with Israel and remain in public office. There are a few outliers, the Palestinian American, Rashida Tlaib, um, Thomas Massey from Kentucky supposedly does not have an APAC guy, as he says, but everyone else does, right? Like, before you can even speak publicly on this issue, you have to talk to your APAC guy, or funding will be your funding will be cut off, right? And you've got some tarot cards in the background too. I see the Fool and the
oh yeah,
Magician. My
oh,
goodness.
oh yeah,
Okay, I got distracted. Um, yeah, because of this, but anyhow, so where was I going with that? Uh, so
well,
so basically, our the U.S. government is owned by the APAC lobby, the Israel lobby. So um, despite the fact that a majority of Americans do not support the Greater Israel Project, um, the people in charge don't give a shit, and because they're owned. And there are other aspects to this too. It's known that Epstein, for instance, was Mossad and or CIA, and he was basically running a blackmail program. So a lot of these people not only are owned financially, but they're also being blackmailed, right? Like, they've done things on Epstein's plane and or island, and so they're owned by the Israel lobby, the APAC lobby, and so they're not independent actors. Even if they wanted to do something, they essentially can't. So I'm responding to the question about how it affects us. I think it does. Like our our reputed government, our government in name, the U.S. government is really not. I mean, of course, it doesn't represent the people; it represents the oligarchs. But also, more particularly, it to a large extent represents the interests of this particular lobby. Of course, there are other lobbies, but this is like the most influential, and there's overlap too, right? Like, say the gun lobby or whatever. Like, they're not going to oppose the Greater Israel Project either. I mean, people often ask, is it which came first, right? Like, did the West and the U.S. in particular help set up the Israeli colonial project over there, or was that set up first and then it co-opted the U.S. government? That it's difficult to say. Like, I mean, maybe someone like Scott Horton could answer that question more specifically, but there's now such an interlocking network of interests and influence that I don't understand. I don't see how it can be untangled. Certainly not by one individual. It's not like, Bernie Sanders would get elected, or Ron Paul or someone.
Yuval Noah Harari was to actually be, the next elected representative of Israel. I think he'd do a pretty good job. I can't really come up with too many other Israelis, but then I don't really hold them in particularly high esteem.
Well, maybe someone like Gideon Levy or Miko Peled, someone like that. I mean, these are obviously not popular people. Do you know either of them? They're journalists and activists, so they would never be elected to positions of power like that. Even though Miko Peled is the son of a general, one of the like founding generals. But
Hmm.
yeah, I guess my solution is to, as you say, um, step away from the monotheistic rivalries and identify with the true original inhabitants of the so-called promised land, those, pagan polytheistic Canaanites, in
Yes, tell
particular
us
the
more about them.
Phoenicians.
Exactly, because that's kind of where, right from the start, we're very aware, right, that you are aligning yourself much more. You're sort of saying, well, I'm not going to align myself essentially with the modern Israelis and modern Palestinians. I'm aligning myself with almost their forebears, I guess. So tell me about that alignment and why that feels like a more natural fit for you.
Well, I mean, my one of my ulterior motives for taking this trip was to do research for the epic poem that I'm still writing. I've only completed the first volume, and I just happen to have a copy here. Look at that, of Letters in a Man A. That's volume 1 of this epic poem in blank verse. And the central figure of this epic poem is Cadmus the Phoenician.
Hmm.
So Cadmus is a kind of culture hero. He's both Greek and Phoenician. I mean, he's originally Phoenician, but according to legend, he taught the Greeks how to write. The Greek alphabet is derived from the Phoenician alphabet, and so, by the way, is the Hebrew alphabet. Even if you consider the names, right, like Aleph, Bet, and so on, those clearly come from a Phoenician prototype alphabet, right? So in my um, version of events, my mythological or imaginative version of what happened, Cadmus is the writer god or culture hero who taught the world to write. And so, like, all the writing systems of the world, you could say, are derived from the one established by Cadmus and or his avatars, right? Like the writing gods of other traditions, whether it's Thoth in Egypt or Odin in the Nordic Norse tradition, Saraswati in Hindu tradition, and so on, right? Like they're all um allo persons of the same personeme that is Cadmus the Phoenician. So identifying with him as I do, I have to step away from like these more modern
Mm.
squabbles and border disputes and so on. Although I want to point
Hey, for
out
the
my
yeah, just to say for those people who haven't read the book, that also you kind of cast yourself in a way, your alter ego, if you like, the traveler. Let's say the traveler in this book is Cadmus, who is also you and your wife, who is cast as Harmony. Perhaps you could also talk a little bit about that connection as well, right? Because those are the two core travelers who go off in when was it 2014
yes,
to visit their friends Yoav, not his real name, and I can't remember the name of his wife that you gave.
Shini.
Yeah. So yeah, talk a little bit maybe about that framing because I found that very interesting. To what is it you identify particularly with Cadmus? What is it that then made on that trip that that it was? I guess at some level you were almost trying to see this world through the eyes of Cadmus, as much as through your own eyes.
My conception of Cadmus was is influenced most by Roberto Colosso's The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony, and so having read that book many years ago before I went or came into voluntary exile, I was already thinking about Cadmus, and I went and read all of the original source materials in the Greco-Roman tradition, especially Ovid. Cadmus plays an important role in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And I think I was also influenced by Joyce's um, character Shem, the penman in Finnegan's Wake. You've got Shem and Sean, these twin brothers, right? You mentioned Cain and Abel before. They're kind of like that, but Shem is the penman and Sean is the postman, right? So Shem is the one who writes the letter, and Sean, the postman, is the one who delivers it. So think of it however you want. Maybe Shem is the idea man, and then Sean is the one who is good at promotion and publication and propaganda or whatever. But I always felt that Shem was somehow related to the word Semitic, right? Like it's no accident. Sean sounds more Irish, right? But Shem doesn't sound like an Irish name. So why did he pick that? Shem the penman. So I always thought of Cadmus as being Joyce's Shem the penman, I think. Oh, it looks like we've got some messages in the chat.
All right. Oh, yeah. I've never done one of these before. How does that
I,
work?
I'm still figuring it out. It's I can't
Um,
always I don't know if it's anything we need to. Let's see. Come on, chat. It says there's 3 messages, but I can't read them. Um. Anyway, that like Joyce's character in Finnegan's Wake, Shem the Penman, influenced my characterization of Cadmus as he appears in my epic. But as I say, the primary influence is definitely Colosso's Cadmus and Harmony, and so much so that the name of my imprint, like all of my books, are published by Cadmus and Harmony Media. When I apply for ISBN numbers through the National Library of Taiwan, I always um, do so under the Cadmus and Harmony imprint. So you can see Cadmus in Greek and Harmony in Greek, and then there's the Gemini symbol, which represents the Cadmus element, me, and then there's Cancer, which represents the Harmony element, my partner in this publication endeavor. And then you can see like the Chinese symbol for marriage. So it's a it's a pretty literal um visual representation of the marriage of Cadmus and Harmony. And then that plays an important part in the narrative of I guess the second section of Letters on a Man A, which reminds me I need to finish
but also of pilgrimizing,
B.
right? Because very often these kinds of travel narratives, I think there's something about framing it as you and your wife traveling together, Cadmus and Harmony traveling together, and also that allows for a kind of duality or for different ways of processing, the various experiences, sights. I'm thinking of that moment in the Baha'i. Is it the Baha'i
Yeah, yeah.
modern, right? Where Harmony is sort of very put off by the fact that she might have to cover up, and then you have this exchange, and then you actually find out that that they're quite um I don't know, snooty or not particularly welcoming anyway as a group in that particular spot of the world.
But
Um,
only for certain people, right? Like they wouldn't let the Asian woman in there with
yes,
her shorts and her
yeah.
uh spaghetti straps or whatever, but we saw white bitches running around. They weren't stopped at the gate. And that same kind of bigotry we experienced on the plane over there, like they well, on the trip over there, right? Like they rummaged through her luggage, and it's clear she was singled out because of her Taiwanese passport. Like these fucking idiots don't even know the difference between Taiwan and China,
Mm.
although the differences are not as great as as some might pretend. I can tell you that Taiwan is basically China with gay marriage, but we'll leave that discussion for another time. But you know, politically, there's supposed to be a difference, and they should know she's not a terrorist from communist China, right? Like Taiwan's supposed to be on your side of the divide, right? Taiwan is supposed to be allied with the U.S. empire, just like you idiots are. I'm talking about like the flight crew of El Al, which is, as I say, basically a military. They're basically military planes with in-flight dinners.
But again, at a psychological level, that all makes sense when you have a whole populace who, for thousands of years, in some incredibly perverse way, genuinely actually do believe they are the chosen people, and chosen by the one God, the one monotheistic God. And how can that? But the chosen people with a huge chip on their shoulder, because also they're a minority in the world. Of course, you're going to get that behavior on their turf, right? On their territory, because I don't know. I mean, I've only been to Israel once in my life as a teenager, and yeah, that was very much the vibe. That was very much the vibe that while you're here, you know, you're nothing and nobody, because God's on our side.
But you were welcomed, right? You're chosen too.
Well, not really. I mean, personally, I didn't feel in any way welcome because, yeah, because, you go around those holy sites, and particularly if you're Jewish, you're sort of expected to be deferential and ready to put your hands in your pocket and, place money in the hands of the chuggers. There's loads of charity muggers, religious, so-called religious men with big beards and whatnot, walking around the sites looking for Jewish tourists that they can fleece. Give me $100 and I'll say a prayer for you or something.
Yeah.
And that whole, and I mean, this is also why I liked your book, because in a way it's also that balance, because you have this sort of detachment, you have this, like when you're on the Via Dolorosa, I think is a really great example of that, right? Because at one level you're trying to connect with the deep mythical spirituality, culture of the place, and yet, of course, you're also aware that this is just a tour. It's just another tourist trap. Um,
Yeah.
uh, trying to make a buck off you.
But I find that, everywhere I go, like no matter what kind of traveling I'm doing, I'm always seeking out these places of historical and cultural interest, but I'm always very aware um of the lowbrow um vibes of any particular place as well. Someone in my writers group said that's one of the characteristics of the Mark Will style, the celebration of the high and the low, and I accept that. I
Yeah,
mean, especially today, like that's everywhere you go. There's going to be a fucking McDonald's and Starbucks and
and that's
all
what
of the.
makes. I think that's what makes the book feel very rich and lived. A small thing, but I really, really like the amount of detail you go into in terms of the food you eat. I mean, you go into great detail for almost every meal, which in a way is very corporeal, right? There's nothing particularly spiritual about that, but just I was, while I was reading this, I was thinking, how does this guy remember? Did you make notes of, detailed notes of everything you ate? How did you have that level of recall whenever this was? I mean, 9 years, no longer, 10 years later, practically. Yeah, 9 years later, when you were coming back to all of this.
Here's the little green notebook.
Uh huh.
And then I also had the iPad with all the pictures that were taken mostly by me, sometimes by my travel companion. But yeah, I just basically kept a diary, a journal day by day. And
And you wrote down,
I wrote
meals you.
I wrote down everything that I thought I would want to refer back to, because I knew even at the time that I would eventually write something or do something with all of this data, right, that I was collecting in my notebook and on my iPad. And so yeah, when it came time to write the book, I just went back and I just as you know, each chapter of the book is basically a day of the trip. So that's a good way to organize it, day by day. And it's all here. Like I know exactly what I did each day, and I can also from the notebook, and I can also look at the iPad, which records the date and time that photographs were taken. So those are my aids to memory, right? Like the Proustian process of recollection is aided by, in my case, by a notebook, which Proust himself would have had. But I've also got the technology of the iPad, which he wouldn't have had, although he could have, referred to photographs
Mm, mm,
at that
mm.
particular time. So, maybe he could have done something similar. But yeah, that like that, and that's another characteristic of, I mean, that's a Joycean characteristic too. This focus on the quotidian, the precise details, which to many people, many readers find them boring, and I've been told that sometimes my travel writing is just like almost like a list. I did this, then I did that, then I saw this, then I ate that, and some people say, like, what's the point? It's a bit boring. So I guess one reason
Did
I,
you have a lot of thinking and sort of synthesizing of history and geography throughout that? I mean, to me, yeah, to me that just brings it all kind of alive. You know, the smell of the place, the textures of the foods, the sounds of the crowds, and so you were very, very aware when you were making those notes that you kind of wanted to capture that specificity of sensorial detail.
yeah, a lot of that comes later though, right? Like the raw data is in the little green notebook and on the iPad, but then when I actually hammer out the narrative for a particular day, I start making all these connections with, you
Mm.
know, historical events, cultural touchstones, and then I have to try to, you know, construct a narrative that's interesting to read. And I guess that's one reason for the Cadmus Harmony device. It just adds an extra layer of intrigue or mystery, or I don't know. It allows me to step away from it. It's not like my vacation to Israel in a time of war. It's Cadmus and Harmony's trip, and there's like this quixotic uh, purpose of searching for Phoenician heritage, right? This Cadmus character, the role that I assume is going to this place, modern Israel Palestine, in search of his Phoenician roots. Like, what
Yeah.
an absurd project! What a hopeless endeavor that is, and yet, I was able to, actually discover a lot, and I learned many things that I could incorporate in the epic poem that I eventually wrote. Because even though I was working on it in 2014 when I took this trip, this wasn't published until 2016. So a lot of, the research I did for the trip, reading Rawlinson's History of Phoenicia, for example, and the other sources I mentioned in the introduction, Roth's Operation Shylock, Edward Said's works, Mark Twain's Innocents Abroad. They helped me, uh, I guess, develop the format that the book would eventually take. And I finally was able to access the chat. We've got a few messages from a certain Tomek. He says, "What up, fellas? No love for Yuval. I agree with him on that. He'd probably make us all have
Really?
chips in our brain. And he says Norman Finkelstein for Emir of Israel. Yes, a much better choice than Mark Will. That might actually work. Of course,
Who
he
dat?
would. Oh, Norman Finkelstein. He's an American academic. He's mentioned in Pilgrimizing. He's, you know, the son of Holocaust survivors, but he's a Palestinian, um, resistance advocate and certainly an anti-Zionist. One of the leading intellectuals in the U.S. who's trying to explain to the American public that you can be anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic. Do you understand? And that whole phrase anti-Semitic is questioned in my travelogue as well, right? Like, wait, the Arabs are Semitic too, aren't they? And for that matter, so were the Canaanites and the Phoenicians. Like they're all so-called Semitic people. Um, are they
Mm.
not? Aren't they all like descendants of Shem the
Absolutely.
penman?
And that's why I think the Cadmus, again, coming back to the Cadmus framing, I think it's a very um, subtle but interesting one, right? Because Cadmus has this a sort of hybridity, I guess, right? He's a very hybrid character, and I get that sense from that's also something that you bring, right? It's a very hybrid text, and that also seems to be, understandably, maybe the way forward. That those two very polarized identities um, need to become more hybrid. We all need to become more hybrid in order to be able to kind of forgive each other, because if we actually genuinely are all Semites and we all hold, parts of each other within us, then I guess we might see any kind of attack on another as sort of an attack on ourselves.
Well, yeah, and the never again doesn't apply to just one ethnic group, right? That should be a universal principle,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, which for some reason is difficult for some people to understand.
Mm, mm.
Um,
What was it?
even though I was
Yeah.
just going to say, like, even though um, I do try to distance myself from the two, I don't know, major combatants or
Well,
parties
players.
of opposition. Yeah, like I'm trying to imagine like a third possibility, but I have to say my experience there and certainly now, there's been an evolution, and my sympathies are certainly with the underdogs, right? Who are the Palestinians. Of course, it doesn't mean that you know I'm a supporter of Hamas. That ridiculous argument. Piers Morgan asking people, "Do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas?" We're not talking about that, but the there's even if you say we're all one and um like ultimately
We're
there's
all
a
one in the sense
unity.
that all that food you were eating, that's exactly the same. I mean, both sides on that, that the wall, right, divides these two people, or essentially, which is the tragedy, of course, of Israel, right? Essentially, as far as I can tell, when I close my eyes, they're the same people. They're eating the same food. They have the same obnoxious, brash, in your face kind of Enneagram 8 personality styles as a sort of a culture, if you like. They're
I should have fit in better then if they're Enneagram 8.
I don't know. I did ask GPT based on pilgrimizing, uh, what personality style it thought you might be, and it came up with it thought based on just on pilgrimizing alone, you're more of a 5.
Really?
That's what it came up with. Yeah, yeah. But that's also because it's such a
Which is what
well
the
researched story,
investigator. Yeah, okay.
very scholarly. But it's also again, it's 5 wing 4 because it's got that personal element to it, but it is quite detached, right? I mean, again, you kind of you're not sort of jumping in there in any kind of emotional way. Um, you are really trying to take a you're trying to see what's actually going on as you travel and as you read, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there are some emotional moments, like there were moments of real anger and frustration. Like I've mentioned the nonsense with El Al Airlines and the
Yeah,
the lost luggage, and um, that was particularly difficult for my
yeah.
travel companion. She got the worst of it. Um, but and then also like the you
And
mentioned
just
also the Baha'i Gardens.
itself on the separation barrier, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's outrage, there's sadness, there's resignation. It's not no, it's not detached in a it's personal. Um, but that's the nice thing. I mean, that's what I like about it. It's got this. It's very worked over, right? It's not just. It's a text that's been clearly worked on very assiduously. um, well, that's how it reads, anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that in particular.
I'm just interested because you have again the premise was the two of you going out to visit Israel, but also hang out with this friend of yours. I mean, who is Israeli? What was his? Has he read this book? What was his kind of reflection? Because also you're not you're not massively I don't know, sort of massively polite towards his children. I don't know how much fictionalizing or non-fictionalizing was going on there towards his brats, essentially. Um,
yeah, yeah.
uh, has
Well,
has he seen this text?
I don't know. I mean, as I mentioned
Oh
in the
right.
book, I've had no contact
Oh
with
right. Oh,
with this person since he left the island. So
ah,
I rather suspect. I mean, I doubt he's following what I'm doing now, which is unfortunate because when he was here in Taiwan, we collaborated very closely and intensely, and as I said, he was the best man at the marriage of Cadmus and Harmony,
yeah,
and
yeah.
there was I I mean I can tell you my theory. Something changed when he went back. He had been here for many years, and then he went back, and he was not the same person. So I think I think the Hasbara captured his brain. That's my theory. Maybe he would disagree, but um, I
Captured his
don't.
brain in what way?
Well, meaning that he left for a reason, right? Like he himself was in self-imposed exile here on this island, but then he went back, and so far as I know, he chose to stay, right? So if you make that decision, it means you're buying into the whole project to some extent. Maybe it's out of cussedness or stubbornness. It's like, well, I'm from here, so fuck that. I'm staying. I don't care what anyone says. Maybe you just dig in your heels, but there's a reason he left, right? Like there was something about the place that at one time must have disgusted him, and he wanted to escape that. But then he went back, and I think he's, chosen to stay.
Mm,
That's
mm.
that's speculation on my part, though, because I have no contact with them. But if I had to guess, I would say, you know, um, he eventually, and I say that because so he went back, and then he came, he returned to Taiwan for like a year before going back, um, permanently, so far as I know. And there were some political conversations that we had, and I think that probably was the um, reason for whatever falling out we had, right? Like, because I wasn't an enthusiastic supporter of the, I don't know if it's the Likud line or whatever. Maybe he considers himself a liberal, but again, does it really matter? There's not a lot of difference between the so-called far right Likud party and even farther right, those settlers, and then the so-called leftist, which is not leftist at all. They're basically on board with the neocolonialism, ethnic cleansing, genocide, whatever you want to call it. Like, if you look at polls, there's overwhelming support among the public, even those people that like hate Netanyahu and want him kicked out of office for corruption and all the other things, all the other crimes he's committed, right? Like, they all hate him, but when it comes to like management of the war, everyone's pretty much on board, are they not? That's my impression. Even those who would call themselves, you know, like liberal. Like, there's no such thing. I mean, you could argue there's no such thing in the States either. Like, if you
Yeah,
if
I
you're on
guess
board
it
for
becomes,
empire, you
yeah,
you can't support a liberal agenda, right? Like, if you
yeah,
support the war machine, you may as well just call yourself a fascist.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Again, you have to sort of almost do a thought experiment. Like, if I'm trying to think, like, if th- what happened on October the 7th had happened in Glastonbury, a major music festival here in the UK already, and this was covered on the news that a bunch of people had come in and wreaked bloody havoc um, uh, at a music festival. Um, I wonder how many British people would be sort of saying, "Oh yeah, go easy on them." you
Uh,
know, um, uh,
very few, I imagine. Of course,
or in the States, imagine that
oh,
level of, you know, yeah, that level of kind of killing and maiming at a music as a big music festival.
well,
But
we've
of
already we've
course,
already we've already seen what the reaction would be. The U.S. had its 9/11 too, and we're still dealing
that's
with the fallout from that. I would just say, though, that does Glastonbury have a concentration camp right next door to it? That would be an important difference, right? Like, you know,
mm,
the music festival, they're having a rave like right outside this open air prison. So, the circumstances are a bit different, right? Like, you're almost, if you're like celebrating next door to these people who are in an open air prison or the world's largest concentration camp, you probably shouldn't be surprised if they break out and try to do some damage to the people they perceive are oppressing them, or at least complicit um, in their oppression, which again does not justify any atrocities, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah, fair point. Fair point.
But it's just a different scenario. I mean, look, we can go however deep you want with this, but just like 9/11 in the US, I don't believe the official narrative of that, like the 9/11 commission report. That's total bullshit, just like I don't believe the Warren Commission report about the JFK assassination. I'll just say that, straight up. Like I'm not going to pretend to believe that obvious whitewashing of these deep state events. And likewise, I don't believe the official story of October 7. Like, there are all kinds of suspicious things. We know that Netanyahu financially supported Hamas because he thought it would be better to deal with them than the more moderate PLO or Palestinian Authority, right? Like, it was a way of perpetuating the conflict and keeping it going, right? Because everyone hates terrorists, and if they can designate these people as terrorists, then you can keep the war going forever. And of course, that's what he wants to do, because once it stops, he's going to jail for corruption. So it's in his interest to keep the conflict going. Of course, now with the Syria situation, it's even more nightmarish and complex. But yeah, so there's that. The whole question of the funding of Hamas. There's like the suspicious. We know that I think it was Egypt had warned Israel of an impending attack. Some IDF um, soldiers had warned higher ups of an attack. Um, we know there was a late response to the attack, right? Like, all of this carnage that was done. Like, how were they able to rampage for so long, right? This is like the most heavily fortified and surveilled place on earth, and yet these guys in fucking hang gliders and flip-flops and Adidas jumpers were allowed to rampage for hours and hours. And we know, like, the atrocity propaganda was exaggerated, the beheaded babies and babies in ovens and mass rape and all that, so don't be surprised if, just like with 9/11 and the JFK assassination, and maybe we'll find out these Trump assassination attempts, right? Or there's more to the story than what CNN and Fox News tells you. And I think that's probably true of October 7th, which, again, disclaimer, does not justify any atrocities committed by the underdogs. We're not talking about that, but legally, they do have the right to resist. That's just international law, whether people like it or not. So,
Yeah. Do you feel, I don't know, are there any, I mean, I've asked you a few questions, but I'm sure as an author, right, there's always the obvious questions one gets, and you're like, oh yeah, of course he's going to ask that one. Are there any, I suppose the question is, are there any questions I haven't asked you that would be interesting um, uh, to have some kind of response to? Maybe parts of the book that I haven't picked up on or brought to the fore that would be interesting for somebody coming to this book or thinking about potentially reading this book. That's a badly phrased question. I'm essentially saying, have you got any? Can you
any
come up with a
questions for myself?
yeah? Can
Well,
you come up?
I
Yeah. What
one
questions
thing
would you have liked me to ask you, which I haven't actually managed to
Right.
extract from my own head?
Well, I was looking back over, some of it before our chat, and I was asking myself, like, how many legit Canaanite sites did I actually visit? Because, you know, a lot of these, the Phoenician heartland was really in modern day Lebanon and Syria more so than modern day Israel Palestine, right? So like the actual Phoenician sites were really, let me look at my map here. I mean there's Oxiv in the north, which is right, it's like basically on the border with Lebanon. Um, and other than that, I mean, that's really like the only ancient Phoenician site. Of course, there are little archaeological remains throughout, and there's like, I don't know, cultural remnants everywhere. But like the real Phoenician heartland was actually farther north, and initially on the trip, as I think I mentioned in the introduction, there was some thought of maybe going to other places, including Egypt, Jordan. I mean, at that point, I don't think it would have been possible to go to Syria, but I would have liked to do that, especially Lebanon. Like um, like um, some of the major Phoenician cities were there rather than in Eretz Israel or Israel Palestine. So in a way, like, the book is a documentation of my failure to, or Cadmus's failure to find like the essence of the Phoenician culture and
Mm.
people that he was really searching for. But that's what makes it a quixotic
That's what
kind
makes it
of.
yeah, and also maybe a somewhat deviant text, I guess. Going back
Yes.
to the
Yeah.
question of which I also would say is probably, you know, what makes any of these kinds of texts that have got one foot in the genre and maybe one foot out the most interesting, right? Well, what is the best book on D.H. Lawrence? It's probably Jeff Dyer's
Yes.
book about him
out
trying to
of
write about Lawrence, but not really,
out of
not
out of
really.
sheer rage,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I
I mean,
that's a that is a
this
that
kind of hybrid
it's
thing.
it's interesting you mentioned that, because his whole persona and approach in that book has definitely influenced my travel writing. And I mean,
Oh
I
yeah, yeah.
I
I
always
didn't
thought,
fire, but yeah, I can see that connection. Yeah. Mm.
yeah, I mean, that's a great one. Like, I mean, I sort of I thought of myself more as a poet and a literary fiction guy. Like, if someone asks, "What do you write?" "Oh, I write literary fiction. That's my genre." And sometimes I write poetry, and sometimes I do translations, mostly literary translations, right? Like literary classics. But um, I realized that the travel genre, travel writing, is just as important a piece of the Mark Will puzzle or whatever. Like, it's also important to what I do. Like, I'm planning a book on my trip to Iberia. When I went to originally I went to Portugal, in search of Pessoa, just like in this case I went in search
Oh
of
right.
Cadmus, but I
Oh,
went to Portugal in search of Pessoa. And then on the trip I realized, oh, I'm actually more interested in Spain. So then then like I spent more time in Spain than I actually did in Portugal. But the
Hmm.
impetus was to find the essence of Pessoa, in
Oh, that's so
Portugal.
interesting. You didn't even talk about that in your Pessoa episode that we did recently.
Yeah, it's because I haven't written anything. It's like the idea is well, the title of the book is or will be Journey to Iberia. The what's his
hmm.
name? Saramago has a book called Journey to Portugal, and I'm sort of using that as a reference point. But eventually I will write that travelogue, and it's the same thing. I've got um photos. I think they were taken with a phone, right? It's after the a few years after the iPad, so I was using phone rather than iPad. And I've got not the little green notebook, but another notebook somewhere with with all my notes day by day. So same kind of thing. And eventually that will be my Iberian travel log. So, oh, and of course, I wrote postcards from the Nordics. That was about my um, trip to Northern Europe and my search for the essence of Scandinavian and or Nordic culture, the essence thereof, right? So I'm
Hmm.
always, I don't know if I mention it in Pilgrimizing or not, but I'm always looking for the genius loci, the spirit of the place. What does this particular location, what's unique about it? What does it uh, communicate to the traveler and or the native? So yeah,
And
it's
what,
kind of a
yeah,
quixotic
yeah.
quest.
What do you think? What what was it that sort of on the ground um, experience was able to give you? Because you mentioned how you had this experience in Israel, and then you took some of this some of that essence or that experience of that essence, and then you channeled it into this poem. What the epic poem? What do you think? Yeah, what do you think is going on in that place? What is some of that essence there that you were able to you were able to take into this more literary work?
It's probably not even something that I could define or express. It's just something about the food, the Mediterranean, um,
Hmm.
the climate, the smell of the place. Like you just get a feel for it, and it inspires certain. It being there inspired me to like revisit the Bible and the Quran and you know um classical sources like Josephus and
When you revisited those, were you then having sort of visited the modern day stage set, if you like, which is trying at some level to give you the I mean, I will say
Disney
Disneyland.
version. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's kind
exactly.
of in a way, but it sort of is, right? It's sort of trying to give you the
Yeah.
packaged version of that. Yeah, was it a bit like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an analogy, like, me reading On the Road and then actually one day going and, you know, visiting America and actually driving down some of those
Yeah.
highways. Was it a little bit like that? That when I returned to On the Road, I had a very different, a slightly different experience because I could again call up some of those smells and visions and things. It wasn't just all happening in my imagination.
Oh, absolutely. And it's always different, like you can read and research a place all your life, but
Yeah,
nothing replaces going there, You just have to go there. It's going to be different. And
yeah.
that's something that interests me about travel, like the disconnect between expectation, idealization, and the reality. There are a lot of comic possibilities, and I hope this book and all of my books are comical. I hope I always, even though I have a serious purpose, right, as this Enneagram 5 investigator, it is a serious purpose. I take it very seriously. It's a spiritual mission, but I do have a sense of humor about it, and I like to
Oh yeah,
take
there's
the
a lot of
piss out of myself,
yeah, yeah, sure, yeah, there is absolutely.
and ridicule it. And um, since we're talking about my work, there's another. I've also got a series of novelettes on, which are based. It's fiction, okay, but it's based on a trip to Ireland I took with my best friend from the States, who's also a Joycean. So we went to Ireland for the Bloomsday
Mm.
festivities, actually 1 year before the Israel trip. So it was 2013. So
Yeah.
that summer, he and I went to Ireland. The next summer, the wife and I went to Israel. But uh, I'm just now realizing it's like
What a juxtaposition. Yeah.
well, this is just every time I travel, it's like, okay, I know what the real ulterior motive here
Similarities
is.
there between Ireland, Bloomsday, and Israel. I mean, they seem so different, but of course, Ireland has had its fair share of bloodshed and
Yeah, well, yeah, but
idiocy, right?
I think more than that, it's the fact that, well, you could draw a parallel between my travel companion in the Aaronesque series of novelettes. In the series, he's called J.G. Vara, but J.G. Vara is the um, fictionalized version of G.J. Villa, just as Martin Wells is the fictionalized version of Mark Will. So we're being pretty obvious with our personae, right? It's like what a Pirandello would call a naked mask. You're donning a mask, but you can see through it, just like with the Cadmus. Like it's obviously Mark Will,
Yeah.
that you're fictionalizing it, but you're doing it in an obvious way so that it's not clear. Wait, is this real or is this fiction? I like that kind of um, ambiguity, and I like showing the mechanism behind the fictionalization. I like revealing that to the audience. I mean, it's kind of like the Brechtian alienation effect, right? The one of the devices of epic theater is to show all the mechanisms so you don't get too caught up in the drama in the fiction. You can kind of step outside of it and view it critically. So I like that. But
Yeah.
but just at see, I've said quixotic several times because often on these trips, and Tomek has traveled with me, so he knows how I can be. I'm the Quixote character. I'm the one like, let's go here. No, we got to go see this site. Oh, wait, I got to take a picture of this. Oh, I got to write this down. And then my travel companion, whether it be Tomek when we went to Russia or um, GJ Villa when he went with me to Ireland or Harmony when she went with me to Israel, my travel companion is the Sancho Panza, the one who's more realistic, practical, and telling me, "Hey, come on, maybe I'm too much of a four, and in that
That's also
scenario."
true. But you're also describing a very seven. You know, again, if let's say your home base is more eight, it's eight. It's definitely 8-wing 7. It's not 8-wing 9. Because it's that kind of like, yeah, let's go there, let's go there. I don't know. That's my sort of sense.
Which
Uh,
is, well, it's unusual for me because
I think he's a classic 7. He's 7 with a strong sort of romantic four fix, but he's more seven than four, I think. He doesn't.
Quixote, you're
Yeah,
saying?
Quixote. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I maybe I mentioned this before, but I don't think that's my natural state. Like in my, which is maybe why I need travel. You know, I need to be taken out of my routine everyday life, which tends to depress me and make me feel melancholic and uninspired and like I feel like I'm stagnating and I can't do anything. So I need to be snapped out of that by getting on a plane and going somewhere and experiencing all this new stuff. And it like recharges me. And that's, you know, that's where I get those bursts of energy, like this frantic need to go, go, go. We got to see everything. We have a limited amount of time. I want to see all of this stuff on my list. Let's go, go, go. And then the other person is like, wait, aren't we on vacation? Can't you slow down? No, no, we got to go. Look, I got my notebook. I got the iPad. I got my phone. We're going to take pictures. Let's go. We got to go find Cadmus. We got to go find the spirit of James Joyce and Flann O'Brien.
But
We got to find,
it doesn't body
fucking
way.
Ibsen.
What you're describing, though, I think is what people desperately want in travel and don't always get, which is to that feeling of like being on a mission. That's why it's so, and that definitely comes across in the book. But I think also that is such a beautiful way to travel, because most of the time it's like, okay, well, we'll go here and let's see what's around. But to travel when you have that mission also makes travel, right, so much richer, and it just makes it a completely different kind of beast.
Yeah, I mean, for me it does, but it also, I think it annoys my travel companion, whoever it may be. At times it's difficult. One travel companion said to me that I was die hard, what did she say, die hard tourist or die hard traveler. This was on a trip to Japan. So yeah, I kind of pushed her too hard. That was many years ago. She had followed me to one too many Shinto temples, and she was just like, can we please just go, have a beer somewhere, and can we stop like going to every single site on your fucking list? So I need that, right? I need someone to
Like
pull
when
me
you
back.
yeah, when someone is traveling with you or on that Israeli trip, right? You would arrive somewhere, you would want to sort of soak it in. Would you be also requiring time to actually almost commune with the place, making notes in situ, or would you be trying as much as possible to just be experiencing the day, and then later on in the evening you get out your notebook and kind of do some writing?
Usually, yeah, I would usually um during the day I would document things with the iPad, since that's what I had on this particular trip. I don't know why I didn't have a smartphone at that time, but whatever. I was still using the iPad. So I was taking a lot of pictures during the day, and then usually at night I would look at the pictures, take detailed notes, ask my travel companion, did I forget anything? And sometimes there'd be, a couple of details I had overlooked or forgotten, and those would go into the notes as well. But that is the question, isn't it? Like, do I experience a place more than other people because of my um, documentation through photography and transcription and journaling, or is that causing me to miss everything? Right? Like maybe if I just left the iPad at home, left the notebook at home, just experience the day, would I have had a richer experience? I mean, I think for me the answer is no, but that's because I don't know any other way. But I know if I didn't do that, if I didn't photograph things, if I didn't write things down in my journal, I would just feel like, oh, it's all slipping away from me. I'm missing so much, and I'm gonna forget. And what will this experience be until I process this experience through some kind of creative
Mm,
alchemy?
mm,
It's like a burden I'm carrying around. So when I finally finished this book after 10 years, it's like, okay, so done. I can check it off the list. Israel Palestine, done. I hope I never go back there. I don't ever want to go back. There's nothing more I want to see there. And I probably won't go back to Ireland, because there are too many other places, you know, that I haven't been. I haven't been to Antarctica, for instance. I haven't been to South America, right? There's only so much time we have, and I feel like I did my best. I engaged. Maybe I didn't like actually grasp it or discover it, but I at least engaged with the Genius Loci, the spirit of place. I tried, and I had a meaningful dialogue with it. Hmm.
mm.
Yeah.
Which I guess I should have maybe asked you this as the first question. What is it? The book is called Pilgrimizing. What does it mean to be a pilgrim for you? And yeah, what is the difference between a pilgrim and a traveler?
I think just what we talked about, like the pilgrim is on a spiritual mission. A traveler, a traveler could be a pilgrim as well. The word the word that I coined for this series of novelettes, only volume 1 has been published so far, Flansday. Um the Martin Wells character coins the term peregrinography, which is the graphing of pilgrimage, right? Peregrinations. So it's travel writing, but with a spiritual purpose. You're going in search of some connection. I would define it that way. It's the connection with the Genius Loci, the spirit of the place that you're visiting. So that's it,
And
right?
what was that connection for you?
In Israel Palestine.
Yeah.
Well, just apart from the search for Cadmus and the essence of Phoenician culture, and especially like Cadmus as the writing god or culture hero who taught the world how to write, and my identification with that, you know, avatar, I guess. Apart from that, I feel like I was able to connect with the I don't know how to put it. I was raised Presbyterian, okay? So I grew up in a very religious family. I would even say fundamentalist Presbyterian family. I was forced to go to church every Sunday. I fucking hated it. As a teenager, I rebelled and refused to go, but it's still part of my hard wiring. Like I know the Bible not only from Sunday school and church, and I know all those hymns, and I know about Martin Luther and John Knox and those maniacs. And then later, as a person who was trying to first write songs and then write literature, I read the Bible from cover to cover, Old Testament and New Testament, as a deviant text, I guess you could say, right? Like I know for a fact that I probably have a better knowledge of the Bible than most devout Christians who just pick and choose. They've not read it all from Genesis to Revelation. How many of them do you think that are like kneeling in chapels and churches on Sunday, how many of them have read this deviant text from start to finish? And not only that, but then investigated the Mesopotamian sources, read like the Epic of Gilgamesh and, you know, all of that. And understood, like, you know, the sources for this. And then like ventured off into the Gnostic Gospels, which I'm reading about now. You know, how many of them have done that? That call themselves Christians, right? I'm guessing not many. From my experience, definitely not many. Even my devout parents, I know they've not read it from cover to cover, and so I feel like I was able to not make sense of that, but just kind of and not reconnect either, but kind of understand um that part of my heritage. You know, like we drive by the city of Jericho. We didn't go there, I think, because it was restricted. It was like one of the Palestinian areas, but you know, that that word, that name Jericho, I just hear in my head, Joshua won the battle of Jericho. You know, he blew the fucking trumpet and the walls fell down. I remember that story. So I can't not think about it. We go to Bethlehem, I think, oh, little town of Bethlehem. So all of these cultural resonances, you know, it's like, okay, it came from this tiny little area in the desert near the Mediterranean. You know, on the map, I see Sodom. Oh, wow, Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's kind of like,
This is part of the problem in a way, that all of these places have kind of been fetishized, because yes, there's little, remnants here and there, but it's like, it's like the foreskin of Christ, those other things where there's dozens of those foreskins flying around, right? Those sort of holy artifacts.
right.
I sometimes get the feel with Israel, I really do, in those kinds of places, that it's kind of like, well, here's a little patch of desert, which we're gonna now, this is where important things happened in the Bible. You've read the Bible, right? So this little patch of desert, but of course, this little patch of desert it's just sand and not much flora and fauna. It's all, in some way, there's a lot of imaginative kind of projection going on, I guess,
Oh, a lot of projection. Yeah, yeah.
in the Holy Land pilgrimizing, right?
Yeah, the
Not on your
so-called
side
Holy Land.
necessarily, but I think a lot of people who go there do a lot of that. Well, we all do that, I guess. Yeah.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, and it's nice to be there on the ground and confront that and then kind of compare it to, maybe that's what I was doing, rather than connecting or like um I don't know, understanding, but it's there's kind of like a comparison, like or maybe it's like a disabusing or a disillusionment that takes place, which I also think is good and important and inspiring. Like to be disillusioned can be inspiring too, you know, like to be I often think like the most interesting travel experiences are when I'm disappointed, you know, like we I guess in this book it's when we went to Megiddo, right, which is Armageddon, Armageddon, and we get there, and the fucking UNESCO site is closed, the gates closed, and so we just kind of wander around outside, and there are these. I find this hill of fire ants, so that's like my. This is supposed to be the site of Armageddon, the end of the world. The war to end all wars, end times, right? And there's nothing but a closed UNESCO site and a hill of these fire ants, and then some sad looking palm trees on this hill. That kind of thing, that kind of experience interests me. Like the disappointment is every bit as inspiring to me as like it would be if we went there and saw something amazing, like we actually saw the end of the world or something. To demythologize something is as much a part of my project as, the reverse, I would say. So
Mm.
no matter what happens, there's going to be something good there. You're either going to find something that you're looking for or you're not. You can write about both.
Yeah. And in a way, that is actually captured in the word pilgrim, because I was sort of looking it up. Well, where does that come from? And, 12th century, yes, starts to be used as person traveling to a holy place, often as a penance, right? Or to discharge a vow or religious obligation or seeking some miracle or spiritual benefit. But then, of course, if you take it back to its, proto-Indo-European roots, you probably know this, it comes back to this word agro, like field, right? And essentially, it's sort of at a very literal way, it just means from abroad. So it's sort of like, well, when you go on a pilgrimage, maybe this is the disillusionment part, you kind of realize also how much of a foreigner you actually are in this place, that you will maybe never really be able to understand it,
Oh yeah.
because you're always bringing your kind of foreign preconceptions with you wherever you go.
But then also you realize that wherever you are in the world, even your so-called native land, you're a foreigner there too, or at
You're
least
also
that's
pilgrim.
that's
Yeah.
that's my experience. That's why I say I'm a writer in permanent exile. No matter where I
Mm.
am the foreigner. I'm the outsider. And since you asked about Cadmus, I think that's another reason why
Do you
I'm
like,
so
I mean, do you
attracted to
like
him.
that position? Do you like being that? Because again, that does feel, I mean, it feels quite 4 and 8 and 5. I'm thinking of the Enneagram, but I think the way people feel, I think eights are sort of, eights quite enjoy that, almost a sort of sense of splendid isolation. Whereas I think, fours will also feel that kind of foreigner wherever they are, but feel kind of tormented by that to some degree.
Well,
And yeah.
if we're talking about Cadmus, I think he's both insider and outsider. On the one hand, he's a foreigner from Phoenicia. On the other hand, he's celebrated by the Greeks as the guy who taught them how to write. So he's a Greek cultural hero, but he's actually Semitic, Phoenician, a foreigner. So he has this dual Gemini nature as well. So of course that's going to be attractive to me. And I just realized earlier when I was talking about Shem, the penman, and how that reminds me of the word Semitic. Obviously, because the Semites are descended from the son of Noah, Shem, right? You've got Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So the Semitic peoples are mythologically descended from the son of Noah named Shem. So I think Joyce, certainly there's some significance to the selection of that name, Shem the penman, the one who writes. And he's going to have this Semitic flavor just like Cadmus does. And I think I mentioned to you in our last texting broadcast, I was reading Colosso. We were talking about Colosso. I was reading the book of all books, which is about, you know, the Bible, but especially mostly the Old Testament. He doesn't talk much about the New Testament. And, it's like they were the first people to really like deify the book that is the ancient Israelites, the Jews, like the literary uh enterprise is almost worshipped. It's like highly respected. You could
Mm.
say it is in other cultures too. You've got Chinese ideograms, you've got Egyptian hieroglyphics, and so on. But there's something. There's something. He actually says something like, "To be Jewish is to be a reader," or to be literate, right? Um, so there's something. I think there's something about that in Cadmus too, and maybe Joyce recognized that in his
Mm.
naming of this character Shem the penman, the guy who writes. He's a Semite. He's descended from uh, the son of Noah named Shem, which is that's another fascinating mythological um, tale or legend or story to consider, right? There are three types of people in the world. The Semites descended from Shem, the Hamites descended from Ham. This is basically Africans, right? And then the Europeans are descended from Japheth. Japheth is connected to the Greek Iapetos, the father of Prometheus, right? So in the known world, were all the people in the known world were explained as descendants of the three sons of Noah.
Yeah, which makes us foreigners to everyone and yet not as well. It's interesting. I mean, we're coming to the end of our chat here, it feels, but seeing as you've got, the questions open on the live stream. It sounds like only Tomek is is perhaps watching, though. I don't know if he's still with us. I would. This is also, it feels like that moment, right? If this was being done in a bookshop, this is the moment where well, probably earlier, where I'd sort of say, well, does anyone here have some questions?
Right.
But because maybe we don't have lots of people at this time of the day watching, um, and it's also Boxing Day here, isn't it? And there too. My kind of a more, maybe a playful way of framing this for us would be to imagine that Harmony was your wife was still awake. I presume she's in another room sleeping at this moment. But let's say she was still awake and watching this, and she wanted to write a question for you. What would that question be? And or Yoav, uh, for some reason found this, and he had been watching this. Or if Tomek's still there, Tomek, now's your chance to come up with a humdinger question. But while we're waiting for Tomek, who might have gone to bed at this point,
Yeah, I think
what,
we've lost Tomek.
what would
Um,
potentially Harmony or Yoav, do you think, if they had listened to our talk, what do you think they would? What question do you think they would ask? Either you or me, either the reader or the writer. In this case,
well, I think Harmony would ask, why did you focus so much on Cadmus? Why didn't you give Harmony more consideration? And I think that's a fair criticism. Like the character of Harmony is certainly less well developed than that of Cadmus in the text, right? Like she's just kind of a foil for Cadmus, but uh, in keeping with that quixotic
in terms of
vibe,
her
that's
being a separate person, I mean, yeah, I've never met your wife, but I imagine that there is, I don't know, if I was to meet her, there would be a sort of sense that, yeah, that she was there somehow. Mm.
oh yeah, for sure, for sure. But again, she's just being forced to play the role of Sancho Panza. Although I guess
Yeah.
with the when Yoav is with us on certain days, right? We've got what is called in the book the Trinity, short for the unholy Trinity, right? And then when Yoav's wife comes along, we're the gang of four. So they're different configurations, and of course that leads to a totally different experience, right? Like a solo traveler has a totally different experience than he or she would when accompanied by someone else, right? When they're two people, that's different. You've got to each has to consider the other, their bathroom breaks, and you know
Mm.
someone gets hungry, so of course it's going to be a different experience. Then you add a third person and it's even more complicated. You add a fourth and then it's just chaos, right? And probably you're less likely to follow a fixed agenda, right? And like the Cadmus character has to lay back and just accept that he's not going to be able to achieve everything or do everything on his agenda or list.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
don't even know if I answered the question. That was the answer to the harmony question. Why? What would she ask? Probably why? Why was harmony not? Why were her thoughts and feelings
Yeah,
not?
because what we don't really get a sense, what, other than accompanying, Cadmus, what was that trip for Harmony, right? Again, if
Yeah.
Harmony is here,
Hmm.
what did she take away from the Holy Land?
Well, I think her answer to that question can be summed up by her response to the El Al employees. When she whisper screams to Cadmus, "Are they barbarians or what?"
Yeah, they can be pretty brutal when you're on the wrong side. You know, don't want to get on the wrong side of the IDF or anyone in Israel who has a gun and a uniform. Lots of guns around as well. I remember that,
Oh
people
yeah,
carrying massive rifles around like everywhere, like in
oh
shopping centers.
yeah, yeah.
Honest.
I think in the book I say they
Yeah, yeah.
tote them like school children with their book
Yeah.
bags. You know, it's very common, and they're like praying at the Western Wall with a M16 strapped to their shoulders. It's quite yeah, it's quite a sight. Uh, okay, what would Yoav's question be? Maybe like, how could you? How dare you? You know, uh, probably he
Feel
would.
though you were, I didn't feel though in the book that you were, as it were, biting the hand that feeds, and I think I distrust books um, that have a completely kind of uncritical stance towards the, I don't know, the characters or the other people who were there.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah,
Well, I mean, if he were to read it, I would hope he would also, um, notice passages such as the one where Cadmus compares his relationship to Yoav with the relationship between David and Jonathan, like they're best friends, and for a period of time, that is what we were. But in life, life is long, right? Life is short, they say, but life can sometimes seem long. And over time, people that,
relationships. I think it
yeah,
is. Yeah,
relationships change, and people
yeah,
that, I mean, I had a very close friend here, a guy that I thought was, like a brother to me. And I knew him for basically a decade. And then we had a falling out that was just irreparable. Like I have no desire to reconcile with him at this point. Like
yeah,
it's just I don't know. It's clarifying. It's upsetting and depressing and sad, but at the same
And
time, it
a lot of
teaches
these,
you something.
yeah, a lot of these fallouts are also happening around, of course, understandably, not really in my life, but around Israel and Palestine. One, for me, the big able witnessing this year was I had a couple. I did a couple about a month or two of couples therapy, and this was with a woman who I had seen as a client by herself, but she and her husband came, and the setup here was she's Jewish and has her mother's Israeli, and he's non-Jewish, but like you, is far better read up on all of this stuff than she is, or I am for that matter.
Mm,
So he really knows his stuff, and he also had become over time utterly obsessed essentially with what was going on, and very, very, very anti-Israel, and yeah, just kind of obsessive about how about the genocide, and not wanting to really go out anymore with, kind of the one or two friends they had who he felt were, Jews and maybe a little bit more pro-Israel, and it was causing real issues for them.
yeah,
Um, because, I mean, not that she's pro-Zionist in any way, but just struggling with him being just so anti-Israeli, as he had become,
right.
uh, and wow, that was interesting being in the
Well,
in
this
the
is,
that.
this is what many American anti-Zionist Jews have pointed out. Like, I'm not saying this guy fits this description, but when you're telling me about him, I'm remembering the danger of, the actions of this rogue state that claims to speak for all the Jews of the world, right? Like, there's a danger that the anti-Zionism will become a kind of anti-Semitism, or Jew hatred, right? Um, so people like Max Blumenthal, Katie Halper, and so on. These are prominent anti-Zionist American Jews, like Norm Finkelstein. Like, they point out that what Israel is doing is actually fueling anti-Semitism around the world and Jew hatred
Yeah,
around the world. And in fact, that's really like the purpose. Like, they ally themselves with the, like, they some of their biggest supporters are the Christian Zionists in the States, who believe that when Israel occupies the Jews occupy the Holy Land, Jesus will come back, and then guess what's going to happen to all those Jews? They're going to burn. They're going to be condemned to the fire because they didn't convert to Christianity, and they know this, but it suits their purposes politically to have the support of those maniacs and fanatics. So, very ugly, dangerous, cynical, manipulative game that's being played, and it is causing rifts in personal relationships as well. That wasn't the cause of my falling out with this guy here that I'm talking about. That was over some COVID bullshit, but
all
um
right, okay. Yeah,
but
uh-huh.
that that's a you could argue that that's another psyop that was run on the population to divide us and make us all fight over stupid shit, while the oligarchs steal all the money and
Yeah, yeah.
uh, feed us bugs and force us to live in 15-minute cities. But yeah, it does feel like we're nearing the end of this. Thank you for taking over. Books are
Hey, yeah,
burning.
it's been really, really good. I was looking forward to getting the background intel, and hopefully it can function as a kind of a standalone, in terms of getting your very knowledgeable and detailed understanding of the history and the culture, but also, let's put in a put in a final plug for the book, which I do think it holds up. If you are a Jeff Dyer, I think Jeff Dyer is a good. If you're a fan of those kind of Jeff Dyer travel pieces, right, which is they're always kind of a little bit kind of quirky and I don't know, deviant, I suppose, in the best way.
Yeah.
I think this is a good book to sit to sit next to those. So I hope
that's a great reference point. I hadn't thought about that, but
yeah.
that book was very influential to me. I haven't read any of his other stuff, but that was very entertaining. And I'll just say to anyone still listening or watching, I'm much better on paper than I am in person. So if I've babbled too much during this conversation, I hope you'll read the book, Pilgrimizing, A Record of a Pleasure Trip to the Holy Land. It's on Amazon in paperback and ebook, and who knows, there may be an audiobook someday. So
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to put out there.
with travel logs, it's a little bit, they're more time sensitive, so I don't know if it would work as well, but we'll see if I have time for that. I just finished the audiobook version of Ernest Games, so
Oh, you're going
that'll
to do
be
it.
out soon.
Okay.
Yeah. I sent you that as well. Did you
Yeah, thank
did
you.
any of that pique your interest with I see the fool and the magician back there, and those are the
I have dipped into that, but to be honest, I haven't fully, I haven't really, I've read the first few pages of that, but I want to kind of, I want to listen or read that again. I actually am spending a lot of time these days on good old, shout out to what are they called, Thingy Labs, 11 Reader. Have you come across 11 Reader, which is
No.
this? So they have the 11. So there's a bunch of reading apps out there, right? Speechify, and there's another one. I have Speechify as well. But 11 Reader, who have created a whole suite of AI voices, they have brought out their own little app, which is completely free, and I think has got the best, as in most close to human beings reading. So for example, maybe half of your book I actually had John, whoever it is, who has a similar voice to yours in a strange way, just reading it to me, which was fun. And I think a lot of people are maybe even thinking of doing that now, right? Like kind of a cheap way to bring out your audiobook is do it with an AI voice. I still don't think it's as meaningful or intimate as having the writer or a human, but I have to say he does a damn good version of reading it aloud.
So you fed my text into this app and it read it to you? It read you
Yeah,
Pilgrimizing? Oh,
yeah. So
wow.
I read half of it kind of on an iPad, but the
Yeah.
other half was just walking around listening to someone who sounds a bit like you
Oh,
reading.
wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. What's it called again? I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's called 11 Reader is the app, and it's amazing because I pay for Speechify. Speechify is like £100 a year, but this is completely free, and
Yeah.
it has incredible voices. Sometimes I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, wow, it's almost as good as a human. It literally
Yeah.
is almost as good as a human. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That scares me, but I don't doubt it's true.
yeah.
It just makes me think of all the hours and hours I spent, recording and editing. Just this is not even a long book. Ernest Games is what we're talking about. If you're just listening, it's under 200 pages, right? But the number of hours I spent
Oh, oh,
reading
sure.
and recording and editing this in the studio, not to mention the expense of all that. But as you say, I just feel like
Yeah, it's a
it's my
major push.
text, so
But it
I
is
wanted
yours,
to read it
and
myself.
it is meaningful. I'm surprised that I sometimes get surprised that writers don't, get other people. I don't know how it works. Maybe publishers insist or whatever, but it's really meaningful when you also hear the voice. I'm reading this new Simon Critchley book on the mystics, on mysticism. I don't know if you've come across your radar. It's really
Mm,
good. I'm enjoying it, and he reads it. It's on Spotify. He reads it, and I like his voice. I like his tonality, but I still believe, unless you're a really bad reader, I still believe that the writer should, particularly if it's a nonfiction book, should really read their own book somehow, right? I mean,
yeah,
those sentences came from you; they should be read with your tonality, your rhythms. That's how I would like to hear most books. I'd like to, if I could choose, I'd choose mostly to hear it from the writer's mouth.
yes. Well,
Brilliant.
I've used voice actors before. In fact, I've worked with
All right.
Tomek's father. He's done a
Yes.
couple
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
audiobooks for me, but I, will-
Yeah.
I at some point I'd like to go back and record my own version. So I'm working on setting up a home studio. I'll probably need to get a better mic, and I need to have like a sound booth to dampen the noise in the room, and then I'll record at
You
home
don't
and
even-
I'll take it
I
to
don't
the
think-
studio for
yeah.
editing.
I don't think you need that in the sense that, when I used to do podcasts, I would get pretty damn good audio. I mean, as good as any audiobook. And that's just using the old trick of recording it in the closet. If
Yes,
you if
right.
you're in the closet with all your clothes around you. I mean, I literally got a really good mic. Yes, you get a good mic. I would kind of suspend it on the rail, so I'd have clothes here, and I'd kind of close the doors, and wow, you get pretty impeccable studio, that sort of that
Yes,
that
right,
dead
right.
sound, non-echoic studio sound, but it's maybe not as comfortable as
Yeah, that's my issue with it. Also, in this particular studio apartment, I don't really have a closet, so I think I'm going to have to create some kind of booth. Actually, the engineer I work with said you can just put the mic itself in a booth, and then
yes.
uh, put a screen in front of the mic, and then just basically talk into that little booth around that little box around the mic. So we'll see. I'll work on that, but um, yeah, this one was recorded in the studio. I'm finishing up edits, I hope, next month, and then I'll send that to Find a Way Voices, and they'll send it to all the audiobook platforms. And I'm also releasing excerpts on YouTube. So,
Yeah,
um,
really cool, and I think that is the way forward because the this yourself, right? I mean, Amazon is great and it gives you the opportunity. It's kind of very democratic, but yeah, it's really hard to find stuff. I don't ever find stuff on Amazon. I think you maybe do have a greater chance on Audible or Spotify because again, if I'm interested in anything, right, I'll generally go onto Spotify. I mean, less so Audible actually nowadays. I'll go onto Spotify and I'll be looking for podcasts or audiobooks, and whatever comes up, I'm much more likely to give that a listen than I'll never go on Amazon with interested in a topic and
mm,
do a search for it on there. I'm usually looking for a particular book when I'm going on Amazon. So stuff
yes,
doesn't
right, right.
doesn't get found in that way. Whereas YouTube and Spotify, and maybe even Audible, but particularly YouTube and Spotify are very, very open to that kind of serendipitous happenstance in terms of finding interesting things.
Well, most of the income from my books, such as it is, right, comes from Audible for sure, right? Like the
Oh, right.
audiobooks.
Okay.
That
Oh, that's
I get some from Amazon print and ebook and whatever, but it's mostly audiobook uh the audiobooks that are being found and downloaded and purchased. So it's good to have, if you're going to publish, it's good to have an audiobook version because nobody reads anymore.
unfortunately not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what would you like to promote? I know you've recently changed the title of your YouTube channel. You're no longer the Idiot's Ejing. You are now.
We need some therapy, that's all, as in the Loudon Wainwright song. I don't know if you know that song by Loudon Wainwright
I
called Therapy.
No, I
Um,
don't.
Loudon Wainwright the third. You
I
know.
know him. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Father of Rufus.
Father of Rufus, indeed. And one of my favorite songs of all time is a song he wrote called Therapy. Weirdly, it's not on Spotify. You can find it on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I just think it's just one of those perfect songs. Um, Ultimately about life and therapy. But that's where I got the title from, because the sort of punchline to that song is, "We need some therapy. That's all." And
Okay.
he doesn't put a question mark, but for my channel, I put the question mark because I think that's kind of what I'm kind of trying to interrogate. Like, well, if that's all, really, we need some therapy. That's all. I think we need more than that. Um, but yeah, that's my current creative thing.
Okay, well, we'll put that in the show notes along with the Wainwright, Loudon Wainwright the third song.
That's a great song.
So, yeah, thanks to everyone who joined, and thanks to Steve for hijacking the show and hosting. Maybe we can do it again for Earnest Games if you happen to read that.
Yeah,
And
I'm gonna. I enjoyed the first couple of pages that I read. I'm gonna definitely get into that. Thank you.
okay. And do you have any deviant text that you'd like to join us for next season, season 4? Join Tomek and myself for. You're always
Yeah,
welcome.
let me think about that. Thank you. I haven't actually thought, like, if I was to give you, because I know I was saying on our little group chat, like, we should put what our favorite reads of this year have been. But
Mm,
actually, maybe another interesting list would be, yeah, and which I'll do. That would be a fun thing for me to compile. Like, what are my top 10 um, deviant texts? Because I would love to join you on a discussion of any of those. I mean, I'm just trying to think. Like, this is one, for example, which I think would fit the bill. This book by Eric Davies called High Weirdness.
high
Drugs,
weirdness.
and visionary experiences in the 70s. I mean,
Oh,
that's definitely going on my top 10 list of deviant texts, and
that
also
looks
brilliant.
great.
So, so thank you for that invitation. I'm going to enjoy later on this afternoon looking on my bookshelves and compiling a list of, let's say, 10 texts that may fit the deviant uh, uh, the deviant brief, and
Okay.
doing any of those, that would be cool.
Okay. Well, as for books in 2024, I'll be posting my reading list on Substack and probably Goodreads soon. So those interested, look for that. It'll be coming soon.
I always love those end of year, you know, what did you read this year that just
It's a
knocked you for a
good, yeah, it's a
uh,
good stopping point, the end of the year. It's a good time to take inventory, I guess, and
mm,
sort of see what kind of progress one made and what one
Yeah.
experienced in the last 12 months.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I often forget. Because I read mostly now digital, or audio, right? That I'll go back at the end of the year and I'll look through all the stuff on my Kindle. I'm like, what? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I read that
yeah.
in. That was amazing, and it's just not. I can't even remember that I went. So it's also a good way to also remind yourself of things that you actually did enjoy.
Oh, yeah. Got to keep records.
Mm. All right,
All right.
cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for the chat, and I'll
Thank
be
you.
interested to see if any feedback comes from this.
Yeah, and maybe we can sell some books.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Yeah.